What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to Salty Runback, here to be your weekly intake of all things North American Developmental League of Legends. The Open Qualifier for the NACL has concluded, and we've got our 3 teams. Congratulations to Tempest Gaming for locking up that final spot. We'll be joined alongside Near Airport and Apex Mission Impossible, alongside, of course, the rest of the teams in the NACL. Here to talk about that and more on this episode of Salty Runback. My name is Grapes, joined alongside Hawk. Hawk, how are you doing today?
Grapes! I'm doing all right. I'm a little tired. I had a big Warhammer tournament this weekend, but I heard it was an even bigger weekend in the League of... I just totally butchered that. In the world of League of Legends tournaments. So, kind of recovering. I'm sure you are too, but, you know, it's Salty Runback Day. It's headline day, and that's always a good day.
I spent the weekend both working like 8-hour shifts as well as live tweeting like the entire time. So it was a very fun day. I was sitting in front of my computer, I think, basically like 15 hours a day, which is the same thing that I've been doing basically every Saturday and Sunday of the OQ, but wouldn't have it any other way, as we've had a really fun time in both the Open Qualifiers and CLOL, as the CLOL teams are starting to fill in for that 32-team bracket. We're going to talk about that a little bit at the end of the show, but before we progress throughout our headlines today, make sure you give us a like, subscribe to our channel. We are doing really, really well, of course, and it's all thanks to you guys, so thank you so much for the support. All of our social media platforms are at Salty Runback NA. And speaking of CLOL, we got more and more on our Patreon as well, with CLOL Central, as well as some of our other shows that we're working to get together as well. Links to all that will be below.
Yeah. Join the Discord as well. A lot of good conversation. That's kind of how I kept up with the qualifiers this weekend, was just scrolling through the NACL Talk channel, so it was really great. Everyone was pogging over the Winthrop versus Ole Miss series in NECC as well, which we'll talk about towards the end of this episode, so make sure to stay tuned. Seriously, thank you all so much for the support. I think over the last 3 weeks has been, like, by orders of magnitude better than the rest of our Salty Runback episodes for the past 2 years. So it's really been great to see. I just wanted to say thanks again. But let's stop yapping. Let's get the show on the road. Maybe we can yap more about the things that people actually want to hear us yap about, starting with our Patreon headline. Shout out to Camcom that recommended this one. How we feel about the use of AI, both in general, but then also kind of like more specifically in esports. And I think this is a really interesting conversation because it's definitely one that's been on the minds of many people over the last couple of years or so.
And I mean, I hate to be like the boring guy in this take, but I feel like my take about AI in esports is very similar to just AI in general, which is that it has a lot of good uses, but I feel like it's being used in the wrong way a lot of times, yes, and in a lot of cases throughout our space and throughout our industry specifically. When it's things like, you know, creative, on the creative side, that whether it's, you know, doing generated art or in social media posts, or maybe writing your social media posts with AI as well, which might, you know, we don't want to throw any full accusations out, but it seemed like that's what some organizations were doing this past weekend. It's just frustrating because it feels like the jobs, A, could have been done by a person, and B, could have been done by a person a lot better than whatever was being done, you know, by this artificial intelligence. And it just seems like a misuse of the technology that, of course, is ever evolving and will change our world as a whole.
I know, like, it's so... I want to mostly focus on the esports part of things because I agree. Like, I think my take is very similar whether it's in esports or not. Like, it's more of just about the efficacy of AI and creative fields just in general. And I think, you know, AI, the idea behind it is it's literally artificial intelligence, right? I think the idea behind it to me is that it's supposed to be another brain that you can bounce ideas off of. You know what I mean? Or you can use to help yourself find solutions to problems you may be having, specifically, you know, referring to creative fields in the creative process, right? And I think that is a completely valid and valuable use of AI, you know? Like, if you're stuck on trying to come up with just like good ideas for something, or kind of get over a gap in your story writing hump or whatever, like, you can use artificial intelligence to basically be like, hey, how can I help myself organize my thoughts so then I can create the best thing possible? But people are cutting out the how can I create the best thing possible step and instead using AI as just the solution to the problem instead of a thought process for themselves, right? And I think that's where the issue really comes in. I totally agree. Like things like writing socials posts or AI generated any sort of art or AI editing. People have been talking about like AI casting, that kind of shit. It's like I think it's fine to like look at it and be like, wow, this is cool. You know what I mean? But that should never be a substitute for like genuine creativity because at least in its current form, one, you're just sacrificing quality for laziness, and that's a terrible look. But then two, you're just never going to be able to teach a computer, at least not for a very long time, how to emulate like actual discourse and actually add value to something. And I think that's what's massively missing. And yeah, that's the problem I have is just people going a step beyond, hey, can I use this extra brain every once in a while to help me like figure out how I should frame my ideas? And instead they're just taking the computer's ideas and then having that be the tweet or the video or the whatever. And it's like, that's not the fucking point, you know?
Let's use, us as an example even. Like we have used artificial intelligence at times, but in that ideation process like you were talking about. In fact, one of our shows right now, CLOL Office Hours, that name was created with the help of AI where we, it's a lot of sitting down and like bouncing ideas off of each other and then, maybe we run a couple of simulations through ChatGPT to come up with some different names for the program that we have organically come up with ourselves, right? And then it lists off a couple of options. I think Office Hours was in one of the titles, but then like we reworked it in some way, shape, or form. That's like the way that it should be used, or the ways to help the creative process, and again, just using it to try to fully emulate this creative process. Honestly, especially in like amateur esports, where I feel like a big part of what makes it great is like the scuffed nature of it in a way. Like that is something that is like no like computer, at least right now, like can recreate that style and that thing without coming off very obvious and coming off as very seedy and bad, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. So I guess that's our general take on that. Thanks Cam for that. We want more like random headlines in our request, by the way.
This one was fun.
Just spam some like random stuff. Like we're gonna talk about all the NACL stuff, but like if you want to like hear this side of our conversations as well, like make sure to leave that in the Discord channel. If you do, subscribe to the Patreon. Before we move on to our headline, want to give a quick update to our kill draft for the Open Qualifier, as that is now concluded.
Fuck off.
And using the stats from Aegis Esports, unsurprisingly, your boy Grapes came up with the victory, 247 to 152 the final. Hockey had the unfortunate situation of having one of your players drop out very early in the tournament, and another one of your players, probably the best one in your regard, like moving through the tournament so fast that they didn't get to play enough games.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really all there is to say. Spica promoted too quickly. Sushi also only played the same number of games, I believe, as Spica, or one less because they got 2-0'd in that lower bracket match by the Citadel. So yeah, like Sushi played one less game than Spica. I just did not hit it on players that were supposed to go deep into the tournament. Meanwhile, Bradley had to go on the 8 best of series in a row run all the way to lower bracket finals there, and then lost, which is kind of funny. But yeah, that did not work out for me. You also had Dark Wings, who played just in a fuck ton of game 3s and played extremely well. Also had to play more series than any of my guys. Was just not a good look for my kill draft at all.
I was the very boring choice. Hey, to be fair, one of my players, Ariandel, both due to the lack of match histories for some of the games, as well as just his performance in some of the games that were recorded, like, unfortunately didn't do too well for me, but the other two really carried the weight for me, so I got to say thanks to Bradley and Darkwing. So we're the topic of our first headline, Tempest Gaming versus Citadel in that lower bracket finals, and it was Tempest who came out 2-1 to promote into the NA Challengers League. A big congratulations to Hoarder, Kizno, Darkwings, Aaron, and Minwee, role swapping over from support from AD Carry. Also to Daption, who was a sub for them for that first week. But overall, Hawk, Tempest, a team that I think had a lot of high expectations coming in, maybe not as high as a team like the Citadel, but still very, very high. Now they're in the NACL. Out of all the teams that are currently in, including the ones that just promoted the week before, what's your floor and your ceiling for how Tempest can do in the Challengers League?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. It's really worth noting that before the tournament began, Tempest and the Citadel were the two teams considered the favorites to promote into the NACL. So I think despite all of the trials and tribulations that we saw across the entire tournament for both of these teams, kind of by the end, they came together in the way that we expected. Obviously, just not where we expected, right? And ultimately, one of them had to go home, and it ended up being the Citadel. Definitely a huge congratulations to Tempest. I think looking at the names on this roster, we always knew this team was going to be good. We had multiple conversations about them coming in. Kisno Darkwings in particular being a mid-jungle that I thought was potentially the strongest in the entire tournament. And they played like it for a lot of the tournament, with some struggles from both top lane and bot lane that were also somewhat expected until the final weekend. And I think that's the big story for Tempest Gaming, is that the pieces that we had questions about, specifically Hoarder and Manui, they played much better League of Legends in week 3 than they had in the weeks leading up. And that's really great for both them and their teams. I'm really happy to see that they're able to play to that level, which is a level that actually makes me reasonably confident that they could be competitive in the NACL. I'm looking at Hoarder specifically. I think top lane is an absolutely stacked role in kind of that like upper tier 3 echelon right now. And so for him being able to promote in is really fantastic. And the biggest question for me surrounding this team is going to be, how can those guys continue to develop? Because if I'm being completely honest, I think at this point we all know that Aaron, Darkwings, and Kisno are like NACL caliber players. They can hit mid-table and they can do pretty well. But for this team to be an actual competitor, they need the rest of the guys to step up. And all together as 5, they need to continue to rise as well.
I'd push back a little bit on Kisno. He's only played one split in the NACL, and I think when he was on Lit about a year ago, like he was showing very steady improvements throughout the split. And even though they ended up getting demoted, I think also on Dragoon's Goons, we saw a level from him that was even better than his previous couple of splits.
But no one would argue that Kisno's not a tier 2 caliber player, even if he spent most of his career in tier 3.
I meant in terms of the, like, they'll be middle of the pack and that's it. I feel like Kisno is somebody who's still, as a newer player to the space, like hasn't maybe has not proven his full worth just yet, and maybe still has some room to grow.
I think he definitely has room to grow. I agree with that. Yeah.
But yeah, I want to add on to that point there. Minui, of course, like role swapping. Even if you've like hit that role in Challenger in solo queue before, like in a competitive environment, is definitely a very unique thing. Very interesting that he was playing a lot of these enchanters like Seraphine when he was a bot laner on Cincinnati Fear, but fully kind of transitioned over to being mostly an engaged player. Things on the Rel and the Alistar, I think stood out the most for me for his time throughout this OQ. And I put out a little tweet about Hoarder as well. This guy has been so close to making it over the past couple of years, but I think just like has not had it in him to get to that next step until now. And I feel like that's like a really cool story that I think the broadcast also did a really good job at highlighting. And him going up against Philip, it was a very back and forth series where it seemed like whoever had the better top laner in that specific game won that game. Hoarder outplayed Philip in games 1 and 3. Philip took advantage of Hoarder locking in Nasus like semi-blind in game number 2, and obviously took over the game from there. But I think overall this Hoarder Manui combo is going to be that big difference maker. Do you, in terms of the ceiling and the floor, I might be a little bit higher on this Tempest Gaming roster than even you, Hawk. Just judging from our earlier conversations before we started recording, I would say that their ceiling is a little bit higher than maybe some other people could think. Like I'm looking at the teams right now. I'd have them like right in that Blue Otter tier, maybe even pushing up towards towards third behind Luminosity and Dragonsteel at their absolute ceiling. Of course, that is with all of the team really playing together and with Hoarder and Minui taking big steps. However, their floor is certainly like it is possible that this team also could make it could also finish bottom 2 and make it into the promotion tournament.
Yeah, I don't think they get that high. I think this team could definitely be good. I agree with you that I think they should avoid promotion relegation in most scenarios. I think they're probably stronger than Apex. And I think they're probably stronger than both CCG and Polestar. I don't think I have them rated above any of the other teams though. So I guess 7th right now is like my median expectation for them. It wouldn't surprise me if maybe they were able to like finish a couple places higher than like a Blue Otter or something if they really came together. I think 3rd sounds pretty ambitious to me, and that's again as a big fan of like a bunch of these players. It seems far fetched.
Maybe not.
And then I do think
4th.
they could also. I think there is a world where they bottom out and finish in promotion. It's probably just unlikely.
Yeah, I'd say floor 8th, because I feel like whenever Darkwings and Aaron play on a team, like at least they're the worst that they've ever done is kind of like 8th place or so out of 10. And yeah, I'm seeing Near Airport in here as well, which I completely forgot about. I'd have their ceiling being worse than those 3 teams potentially: Luminosity, Dragonsteel, and maybe Near Airport. I think there's a world where a team like Blue Otter or Supernova could do better than a Near Airport and Dragonsteel and finish in that like top 2. I maybe not as much for a team like Tempest, but I think if things go completely their way, I could definitely see this team finishing top 4.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think I generally agree with everything you said there. So,
Okay. Well, we're wishing the best of luck to Tempest. The NACL season, by the way, Hawk, starts in like just over a week, so we gotta get going in terms of our preview
contrary
content
to
on
what
that.
my voiceover on the NACL broadcast said that everyone DM'd me
Not your
about.
voiceover, the text around your voiceover. Your voiceover is great.
Oh, okay. Was it? Guys, I need it
think.
to be understood. I was just given a script and asked to read it, and so just a bunch of people DM'd me and they were like, "What are you saying on the NACL podcast?" I was like, "What do you mean? What am I saying?"
No, you were very vague. You were vague enough. I don't even think you said a date, but the text around your
Maybe
voice.
you're right. Maybe you're right. I don't remember. I legitimately, I recorded the script like pretty late one night because they needed it like on a quick turnaround, and so I was just like, oh sure, like I can do the voiceover, no problem.
Yeah.
Which I've never done voiceover for one of the things before, so I was kind of excited about it.
I mean, regardless, starts in I think a week or 8 days as you're seeing this video come out. Unless I'm like really messing up my dates sometimes.
Tomorrow is the 18th, so yeah,
Yeah.
8 days. That sounds right.
So we're gonna have to plan out what our schedule is gonna look like in terms of uploading.
Yeah, we're hitting that.
But
Grapes, I know you had
very...
the idea. I know you had the idea of Wednesday afternoon part 2s before NACL, and that might be the way.
That might be the move. You should definitely expect a very big episode either the day before or the day of the start of the NACL split. We have a really fun idea planned, and you'll see it next week. But before we get on with that, let's move on to our next headline, talking about the OQ in general as we take a step back and reflect on what just happened over these past 3 weeks. There was a lot of really great teams that fell, a lot of really good teams, of course, that advanced, and some players, I would say also, that specifically really stood out. I don't know if we wanted to do like a breakout player or like your MVP of the OQ Hawk, but I guess this is just our space to shout out some players who we think had a really good tournament.
Yeah, man. I just to kind of go through some of the obvious ones. Low Jazz, Year of Low Jazz. It was on the wins, and Shibby called it. He was absolutely monstrous. Spica was probably MVP of the entire tournament for Near Airport. I guess kind of going down from like the obvious promotion teams. I look at a guy like Wixie on Friendly Fellas. I think had an absolutely incredible tournament. Instinct, the Citadel. You have guys like Nightstar who played extremely well. Even like going further down on teams like say like Zero Animosity, dude. Like Retrozing. I've been looking at this player for a while. I think had actually a really good tournament on that team, and they managed to make like I think top 32 or top 24 or something like that, which is that's a feat for those players, and I'm really happy to see it. Yeah, I don't know. That I just named a bunch of names. St. Clair, dude, Ricky LaFleur and Flocon solo lanes like killing the game.
I would say in terms of MVP, I think there's like only a few options that you could really turn to. I think that Spica for Near Airport was definitely like their MVP throughout the entire tournament. Although maybe somebody like Pobelter, although he didn't play like the first weekend, so maybe.
Nah, it's Spica. I'm sorry, Pobelter played really well, but Spica is absolutely the MVP of the entire tournament, and I don't think that's really debatable.
I would raise Instinct if they promoted, but they didn't, obviously.
I
think he
still
played
think
so,
I disagree.
Instinct played so well. If he put Citadel on his back and won in that series against Tempest, I would think there was a serious argument. However, there was not. That did not happen. So I think it has to go towards Spica. But in terms of some other breakout performers here for this team for this tournament, I love the Nightstar shout out. I think the Dog fans like team as a whole, like kind of coming together and making it as far as they did into that qualification match, certainly deserves a lot of praise. Um, yeah, Nightstar and Barrack definitely front and center for me there. And then yeah, across the board, I think you hit a lot of the big ones. I'm trying to like scroll through and see if there's anybody else I want to shout out here, but I mean, I think you hit a lot of them.
Another one that I forgot about, which unfortunately ended up falling 2-0 to that one team, but I think Vacant had an absolutely fantastic tournament, as well as Redemption, dude. Like support that no one's ever heard of. I
Sure.
think both of those guys on the Ducky Getters were absolutely stellar. I think that's most of the teams that made top 12 final weekend. I didn't
Yeah.
I didn't get to watch much Fisher tape, so I'm really sorry to the Fisher players. I don't know who to shout out on that team because I didn't watch like any of your games because we never streamed them. But if someone on Fisher or that watched Fisher games wants to let us know who the MVP of that team was, I would love for them to get their flowers.
It was a pretty combined effort, I would say. I think Brunest obviously like has been standing out this entire season, at least on my end. I think YN also had a couple of really big games. Generally, just everybody on Fisher performed really well. Them and St. Clair obviously being the last two college teams is very impressive, and we'll talk about CLOL a little bit later on. But speaking of the Open Qualifier, we're going to put a lid on it by talking about, unfortunately, the last series of the qualifier, where it was not the same format that we originally expected. Now, it came out when the announcement of the tournament was released that every single qualification game to get into the NACL would be a best of five. And that was the case for the first two matchups. Of course, Near Airport and Apex both qualified through best of fives, AMI specifically, through a 5-game series against Dog fans. But going into this last week, it was confirmed on the night before the last day of games that the play-in game for the last matchup was going to be switched from a best of five to a best of three based off of player feedback. Now, the reasoning for this was because all these teams on the last day had to play a best of three into a best of five under the original schedule. However, that was the schedule coming in, and that was the schedule that the players and teams and managers all signed up for. However, after this was brought up, Liga Ace, the tournament organizers, decided to switch this to a best of three, meaning that this very close series between Tempest and Citadel, and I don't want to use this as like a avenue to like negate any of Tempest's success or their achievements. Obviously, they played the series that was put in front of them and they succeeded, but it is a different series in terms of the number of games than
Yeah.
the other two teams had to play to qualify. So, just your reactions off of all of this, and was this the correct decision when it was presented to the TOs?
Absolutely fucking not. I don't know how this was ever allowed to happen. As Proto so eloquently put it, if qualification was a best of three, then Dog fans would be in the NACL. I don't understand how this was ever allowed to happen. One of the teams, which actually was Tempest, raised this issue to the TOs the week before the qualification match, which I don't want to like flame them because at the end of the day, they're just trying to do, what their players want and what their team wants, and it should be up to the TOs to just say like no. You know what I mean? Not a great look for Tempest, I still think, but regardless of that, like I just do not understand how the TOs didn't look at this and be like, no, we're just gonna keep it a best of five. Like, sure, playing 8 games in a row sucks, and we probably could have scheduled it better a month ago. I am completely willing to concede that point. But once the schedule for the tournament comes out, we can't change it the way that it was attempted to because the options that were given. So Liga Ace basically sends a message to all the teams and they're like, we made a scheduling mistake. This is a week before, roughly. It's like a week from a week ago today. This is Monday that these teams got this message. So like less than a week before the games, that Liga Ace made a scheduling mistake, and that teams either need to reschedule their next round of games to be immediately, and then they'll shift everything back a time slot, or they're gonna make that final match a best of three, which is like, it's just such an insane mismanagement. Like, guys, how can we respect the space like this, and then or claim that we do? and then disrespect what it means to qualify for the NACL by making it a best of 3. I think that will always be a blemish on that series, especially given how competitive I've heard it is. I haven't gotten to watch the games in full yet, but I've
It
heard
was very back and forth.
yeah, I heard it was a great series. And I just think that is like, I think that's straight up a blunder, and that's just what I'm going to call it. I just do not understand how either nobody noticed this in enough time to like correct the mistake early enough, or how we changed the schedule less than a week before the actual games.
No, it was less than a day before the actual
right,
game.
but it was rumored to be changing like a week before. But yeah, regardless, like, but then also why did it take the whole week to figure this out? Which is maybe a whole nother question. But yeah, I don't get it. I just don't get it, and it's a huge blunder.
There was no announcement posted by the NACL or by, Liga Ace or anybody affiliated with Riot or this OQ. The way that this came out publicly was via a message in the OQ Discord and then like people tweeting out about it afterwards.
Yeah.
Was this a mistake to have a best of 3 followed by a best of 5 for the players? Sure, you can argue that.
Absolutely.
I will. My pushback against it is that this was supposed to be a grindy tournament, as well as the fact that the way to solve this would have been to make one of the lower bracket matchups happen at the same time as the original upper bracket qualification best of 5s, which you can argue like if you are a tournament organizer, like you want to prioritize having those qualification best of 5s like isolated. However, not all the games are getting streamed anyway, so I feel like pushing the lower bracket matchups to that stage and having them play 2 best of 3s would have made a lot more sense in that regard.
I agree.
Regardless, if you think of it as a mistake or not, the reasoning and the logic to move the entire schedule around after somebody brought it up the day before the games are going to begin is absolutely unacceptable, unfortunately. Like it's just not the way that it should have been handled. Whether after you make that mistake / decision, whatever it was, and you're the TOs, like you got to just lock that down and hold it down, because having the integrity of having every qualification game be a best of 5 is, frankly more important than, some of the players like staying up a little bit like later. I mean, maybe that's a hot take for me, but
No,
these players came
agree.
into the tournament knowing that they were going to have to grind out all day for 3 weekends in a row if they wanted to qualify into the NACL. And they also saw the schedule coming in, meaning they knew what to expect. They should have been able to clear out their schedules in whatever way to make sure that they would be ready for that. It just doesn't make any sense to me that was the decision that they would have made. If the complaint was brought up and Liga Ace said, thank you, unfortunately we cannot change it for this tournament, but for the next OQ we will make that adjustment, absolutely that is the right way to do it, because agreed that it should have been changed, just not for this qualifier at this time, either well before the tournament ended up beginning, or maybe you make that adjustment for the next tournament for, of course, the next OQ, which will happen in a couple of months.
Yeah, 100% agreed. I have nothing else to add to that, really, other than, you talked kind of at the beginning about, like, also the line of communication of things, and I don't want to expand on this point too much, but I think it is fair criticism to say that the line of communication on all things NACL and NACL qualifiers throughout co-streamers to players and teams to broadcast has been subpar. And that's all I'll say on that front. And I think that's a huge thing I would really like to see improved upon moving into the NACL season proper, as well as the summer qualifier that is allegedly going to be happening in a few months. So that is a major point of order there, I think. But in regards to the actual headline of Hand Grapes, I pretty much have nothing to add because I just agree with you. Look, we should do right by the players, and player advocacy is extremely important. But it has to go to a certain point where, like, guys, I had this take already and I got a little bit of blowback for this, but like at some point, do you want to be a professional League of Legends player or not? I know that everybody has lives outside of League, right? But if you're not built for the 8 games in the one day, regardless of how outrageous it may be, then I just think that's like a question you have to ask yourself. You know what I mean? And I think that's how I feel about that.
I feel like the players have the right to prefer to not play as long, and they can express that concern.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
To account for that without like completely ruining the integrity of the tournament. Which I don't want to say they completely ruin the integrity of the tournament. Obviously, Tempest is in the NACL, and I think they largely were deserving. It's just that little asterisk is always going to hang over people as we move through and watch them participate, and also watch a team like the Citadel, another very talented organization with 5 really really good players,
Yeah.
also
Sorry.
not
Let
make it.
me
Not make it.
let me rephrase my point a little bit, because you're definitely right. Like, the players should 100% be able to say, "Hey, this is not great, and we would like it to be adjusted for the future." Uh, I completely agree. I do just think like uh, basically what you said, though, where we have to play the matches we're given, even if it's inconvenient, right? And we should raise concerns for future improvement, but not push to lower the competitive integrity of the tournament that we're currently in. Does that make sense? Does that communicate
100%.
my point better? Yeah, okay. Because I completely agree. Like, players absolutely should have the right to raise issues and stuff like that. And I don't want to take that away from them. So,
Yeah, it just should be dealt with the correct way, and I think
yes.
that's where we're placing our onus and our blame. So,
Yes.
um,
Agreed. Okay, cool, cool,
That's
cool.
a nice bow on top of our OQ discussion. We'll move on to the world of CLOL, where the first 8 teams have locked their spot into the national championship bracket via the upper semifinals of each CLOL regional conference, North, South, East, and West. Congratulations to all those teams. If you want a full explanation of that, I made a video on Twitter, as well as, of course, you can check out CLOL Office Hours over on Patreon. More spots to be determined in the lower quarterfinals, as again, the top 4 teams in each regional conference will earn that auto bid into the national championship bracket. However, there will also be 8 at-large bids that will be awarded via a selection committee, Hawk. We're expecting 3 of those at-large bids to go towards teams in the NECC, whether it be some combination of Ole Miss, Winthrop, Northwood, or Fisher. Also, likely going to be another spot awarded to the second place team in the MEC, if it's either Grandview University or Purdue Northwest. And the question for you, Hawk, is we have 4 spots left that could potentially be voted in by the committee. Which of these 4 regional conferences are you most expecting those spots to go to?
It's such an interesting question. And of course, it's not just the regional conferences that get the at-large bids too, right? It's also partner conferences who only get 1 auto bid per. And so I think it's going to be an interesting conversation surrounding these at-large bids, because we can probably say 4 of them are basically guaranteed to be locked up by the other 3 of the top 4 NACC teams. And then I also think it's fair to say, like, you and I can just both agree that East is going to have a 5th team in this
Oh,
tournament.
really? That's your guarantee. I mean, I think it's very very likely.
I think absolutely.
I think my 4th guarantee is MEC2, which is the loser of Purdue Northwest and Grandview. I feel like that's more locked down
I'm fine
than
with
even
that
East
too.
5.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're probably right. You're probably right. That one is locked down too. So then, honestly, maybe 5 are locked in, because I don't think East ever loses their 5th spot. I mean, it's going to be one of Carleton, Stony Brook, UTM, or McGill. It's probably not McGill. But like, I think Stony Brook has a strong argument. Or as well as Carleton, depending on which team doesn't make it. And then, if like UTM gets upset, they would absolutely get voted in. Like, I find it hard to believe that East would lose that 5th team.
I'd say it's like a 90% chance that East 5 gets in. I just think that in terms of when you're looking at the top 25 polls right now, Stony Brook or McGill, neither of them are on there. There's other teams that are on the poll that technically at this point do not have a spot. That's why I would give it to MEC 2, maybe even
Hmm.
an MEC 3 or 4, as Ottawa and OSU both made the top 25 this past week as well. But I think those are more in the speculative potential tiers, like in East playoffs. I would say East playoffs and then or East 5 and then MEC 3 probably in the like next tier of expected slots to go to, whether it's
I agree.
Ottawa or Ohio State, depending on how their performances in the playoffs go on. I've really been impressed by Stony Brook. They took a 3-1 win over BU, who is the team that has Samikin on it, obviously, right after beating University of Toronto. So they're on a bit of a heater throughout the lower bracket of this playoffs. Now have a tough matchup against Carleton, a team that has beat BU in the past. If they can win that game, I mean, big shout outs to them, and also I think that means that Carleton can get in. But this is a big inflection point for them, where if they put up a competitive series even in a loss, I think that pretty much locks them in as the 5.
I agree. I mean, we're talking about tournament resumes, Grapes. I've been saying I want to do a whole like office hours episode with you talking about team tournament resumes because I mean Stony Brook has back-to-back Q1 wins, to use a basketball term, and they're impressive. They're both 3-1s as well. And now against this Carleton team that took a game off of Western, who has been the de facto favorite to win the entire tournament for quite a while now. That like this is a collision course of a matchup right here, and I definitely agree that either one of these teams could really easily get voted in to the tournament. I do want to move forward though, because I agree with you. I think MEC 2 is probably guaranteed, and then also like MEC 3. I think we still have a lot to learn about these schools, because the problem with both Ottawa and Ohio State is we really only get to see them play the other MEC teams. And GVU and PNW have looked interesting outside of the MEC, but for both in good and bad. You know, like a huge win for Grandview, for example, over Weber State and OQs. They've also had a couple of like good wins and bad losses in the Super Conference, right? So it's an interesting conversation when it comes to the MEC. I think those teams are really hard to rate, but looking across the other conferences and those other, let's say 2 spots. Let's say MEC 3 gets in. Let's say there's 2 spots available. North, South, West, and then I also want to bring up the ESC, Esports Scholastic Conference. Is that what it's called?
Something like that.
Something like that.
ESC.
Let's look at the ESC, who has Ball State that is probably going to get the auto bid, and then also Northeastern and Miami of Ohio, which I think are both teams that need to be in the national conversation.
Yep. They both didn't do too much to convince us of that last week when they both got basically 2-0'd by Ball State. I will say that one of the losses, it was a 2-1 technically on the scoreboard against Miami, Ohio, but the first game was an FF. The other 2 games were like sub 25-minute stomps for Ball State. Northeastern actually put up a big fight. Game number 2 lasted 40 minutes. It was very back and forth. I think Northeastern, and they were basically tied in gold when the game ended. So that all to say, those 2 teams need to have a good showing against Ball State. Whoever ends up emerging in that matchup after the semifinals, if they put up a good series against Ball State, that will certainly put them in the conversation. If they get 3-0 swept, I think they're out. However, I don't see it as out of the realm of possibility that the winner of Northeastern Miami will go on and play a competitive series against BSU, a team that is pretty definitively in the top 25 for most of us here on the committee. So that's how they get their spot, although they definitely have to earn it and have not gotten there just yet, in my opinion. I want to give a shout out probably to Bethany as well, as being a possibility, although I have not been very impressed with their resume so far this season. They're playing Minnesota in the lower bracket, a team that is in the top 25. They got smashed by Minnesota in the regular season, 2-0 in what was a very rough couple of weeks here for Bethany. But if they are able to right that ship, win that game, or even make it a competitive series, I think that puts them in the conversation as well. West, no idea. And South, maybe Florida. They have a couple of okay wins, but not like one good win. They're playing USF. If they have a good series against USF, I think that puts them in the conversation as well.
Yeah. Okay, Grapes. I just want to ask you this question because maybe this would be interesting. So one follow-up question, and then I think it'd be cool if we did a last 4 in, first 4 out, like here on the show. Okay.
I tweeted one out last week, or a couple before the game started, but I think things have changed since then.
So one follow-up question is, if the University of Minnesota loses to Bethany and Bethany gets the auto bid, do you still vote Minnesota?
It depends on what the series looks like. If it's a close series, if it's 3-2, probably, especially if they win their 5th place game. That's what's so good about these 5th place games. Yes. We get to see a little bit more tape for each of these teams. They likely play Mizzou, as UHSP is playing against them after they upset Michigan State without their starting jungler. So if they win that series handily as well as lose very closely to Bethany, I have them in. I'd say the same thing for Bethany as well. If they lose a close series to Minnesota and then destroy Mizzou, I think that puts them in as well.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think right now my last 4 in is loser of Minnesota Bethany, loser of Carleton Stony Brook, MEC 3, and I think I'm leaning ESC. At least given the landscape right now. maybe I could see like either like loser of Berkeley and UCSD though. I think that's also a big possibility, especially if that team's able to get fifth over like a potential UW or CSUN, which are teams that have had a pretty good CLOL season. Um, with the first four out being either that West team or the ESC2, Florida. Then I think also like MEC4 is probably in that first four out.
As much as I hate to say it, I think my fourth in is right now MEC4.
Interesting. Okay, so
I think
you have
Ottawa.
MEC4 as your fourth in.
I've been a bit of an Ottawa hater throughout the season. They haven't been playing with a starting top laner basically the whole year. However, they did just beat Grandview, and I think that does come into consideration.
That's a big win. That's a Q1 win. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Ohio State has been very consistent throughout. I think they're actually currently like second in the standings just based off of pure record. So they've been more consistent than Ottawa, at least in the MEC. So I think right now, the way things stand, I have MEC4 in. However, I am like hoping and praying that another team kind of steps up and makes that something like that happen to make it at least a little bit more interesting. Because right now, it seems like a bit of a throwaway to just stick the fourth MEC team in. But right now, that's just kind of where I have it. So I have, as you said, that North 5, East 5, and then MEC 3 and 4 as my last four in. First out are go to the West, the East, or sorry, the West, the MEC, so the West in ESC 2 and 3, whether it's Northeastern Miami, and then probably like another team in East if we're doing it that way, or if we're talking about purely teams that can qualify in, I'd probably lean towards the West.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. I think it'll be an interesting conversation. It really is worth noting that Michigan State going down definitely made the North Conference a little bit less interesting. 07s to Michigan State, they had a really good run, but they unfortunately fall short of nationals. So,
I mean, that's the thing right now is that every week something's going to change. Some results going to happen that we're not expecting, and it'll change the entire landscape. So if we have the same conversation next week, Hawk, it'll look.
No, I agree. I mean, dude,
different.
if Bethany loses to Mizzou in fifth place or some shit, like they're not getting my vote, right? So, we'll have to see. We'll have to see.
Yeah. Stay tuned to our socials. We're going to be posting a lot more about like scheduling, as well as posting whenever a team gets qualified into the national championship bracket and has their spot locked down. It's been really fun to track that throughout the first couple of weeks of the conference playoffs, and it's going to get even more intense towards the back half. Speaking of CLOL, though, talking about one of those partner conferences, we had, I think, one of the best series in collegiate this season in the NECC upper bracket semifinals. It was Ole Miss taking on Winthrop, a rematch of their group stage game a couple weeks ago, a rematch of like every other time these teams have played each other over the past couple of years. And it was Ole Miss pulling it out in a 5-game banger against Winthrop. Maybe expected via CLOL Hub, as we had Ole Miss 4 and Winthrop 5. I know me personally had Winthrop ahead 4 and Ole Miss 5, or 3 and 4, or whatever it was, just because of that resume of that regular season win. But here's the question now, Hawk. Ole Miss and Winthrop I think they've been proven to be very, very close to each other in terms of where they are. I think from now on, like if you have Ole Miss at 3, you're gonna have Winthrop at 4, and vice versa. Compared to our top two teams, Maryville and UST, who both swept their series 3-0 to qualify into the national championship.
And have also been the top two literally the entire season.
Yep. Compared to those two teams, is Ole Miss and Winthrop closer to those teams or to the rest of the pack when talking about chances of winning a national championship?
It's such an interesting question, man. I do want to say a couple things. Not only, I think, was that series considered the best series in CLOL so far this year, people have been saying that's one of the best CLOL series in the last like 5 years. Like that's how good of a series it was. Winthrop against Ole Miss, I think, is I want to say the premier rivalry in CLOL right now for the last 2 years. Yes. Alongside, I would say also Maryville and UST. That's another great rivalry. But yeah, Winthrop and Ole Miss have been at each other's throats for forever. I will say I've had Ole Miss at 3 basically the entire year, so that's what's up. I'm going to come in with the take to answer the question. I think Ole Miss is closer to the top 2. I think they are a legitimate favorite to be in CLOL contention. I think they're one of the only teams that I believe can actually punch up into that top weight class. I think a lot of the guys in like the 5, 6, 7 range, looking at the Redbirds, looking at Fisher. I'm not sure if I think they can ever beat Maryville or UST in a best-of-5 series. I think I can see a world in which Ole Miss does it.
Could you see a world where Winthrop does it because they took Ole Miss the distance and also beat them earlier on in the season?
I think Winthrop is the last team that I can see doing it. I think they're the only other one, but less so than Ole Miss. Does that make sense? But yeah, I think I would also put, like, right now, my rankings for the teams are Maryville 1, UST 2, Ole Miss 3, and Winthrop 4. That's been my rankings for like 5 weeks now. And I think there's a gap right there before you get to ISU at 5.
Interesting. I'm going to come in with the alternate argument because I've had ISU at 3 for the last few weeks and then Winthrop 4, Ole Miss 5. Probably will switch Ole Miss and Winthrop, but I think my take is that going in, I'm going to leave them at 4 and 5 and say that the answer is that they are closer to the rest of the pack. This ISU team has been playing very, very well throughout the entire season. You know, you can't look at their OQ performance, even though their OQ performance was good because it was like none of the same roster. When this ISU team has like played together as 5 with PCL, Music, Meslo, Fatican, and Barlow, they look basically unstoppable, except against Maryville. And I will say, Hawk, they took a game off of Maryville, and it was a very competitive series all throughout. I think Game 3 kind of fell apart, but Game 1 was very close. Game 2 was a win. Game 2 was a very one-sided win even for ISU, you could say. Like, they very clearly won that game. And they played again in the Super Conference, and it was a back-and-forth series, but it was a 2-0 towards Maryville. So I think that this ISU team is also like in that conversation.
I mean, okay, I'm willing to put ISU in that same conversation of like they're close enough to Maryville and UST.
Yeah.
Putting them above Ole Miss seems crazy to me though.
I don't know. I haven't seen if
it's so interesting. No, I love it. I love the disagreement.
I just think that this ISU team is really, really good. However, I don't think kind of any of those teams have more than like a 30% chance of beating Maryville in a best of 5 throughout the season. I think like I would cap it out as like 70-30 at least right now, because you just look at the players on that team. You know, obviously Scary Jerry's not there, but it's a team that won NACL plus Sajed, who was like the next best AD carry in the league afterwards, and that's just what does it to me. I think I can make an argument more towards them being like 50-50 closer to UST. Just because, like, you know, we haven't seen them really play as 5 as much and something like that. I just find it very hard to have the take that any of these teams, like, have a very good chance against Maryville. I think Maryville's been, like, the consensus top #1 team across every single week, and I think that is, like, my reasoning behind them being closer to the pack, added with the fact that I think some of the other teams around that pack are also very good, whether it's an ISU, a Fisher, a Northwood, a St. Clair, a Western, etc.
I think Ole Miss is closer to Maryville than 30%.
Interesting. I mean, we'll see.
I really think so.
We'll see sooner than CLOL.
Yeah, I mean, we will see in NACL.
Weeks.
Yeah, I think this Ole Miss team is really good, man. And I look at the Maryville team, and I mean, they're obviously fucking incredible, but I don't think Ole Miss is that outclassed in any of their roles. Like, their solo lanes are the main concern, but I think Stray and Asila are good enough to facilitate Ole Miss's win conditions if that series were to occur. And I think I favor Ole Miss's bottom lane. I just don't think you can bet against Shogo and Rhino ever. I think they are the #1 bot lane in CLOL.
A different beast awakes in them whenever they play in a collegiate game. That is for sure.
Like, I think that bot lane is so good. I mean, the point is, clearly we think these teams are great. I think it's definitely an interesting conversation. So you think Ole Miss is closer to the pack, as it were, than the top dogs right now. And I think the opposite. Is that a fair analysis?
I have UST Maryville in their own tier, and then I have the other tier that includes Winthrop, Ole Miss, ISU, maybe a Western or a Fisher thrown in there as well.
I think I have Ole Miss in the tier above Winthrop and ISU. I think they're up there with the big dogs. Or maybe it's just a tier of 5. Maybe it's just it's the top 5 teams. Maybe it's the top 5 teams are all just in one tier. Maybe that's how I feel. I'm not sure. I haven't sorted through that yet, but yeah.
Okay.
I don't put Maryville and USD high enough above Ole Miss right now.
Hey, that's fair enough. I definitely can see that argument. I want to
It's
see
gonna
it.
be a great season.
I want to
It's
see
gonna
them
be a great
play.
season.
I
Yeah,
want to
no,
see them
I
play
know, I
first.
know.
Because right now they're like, I feel like Maryville are just the runaway favorites. As much as I hate to
They were the
like
runaway
say
favorites
like the
last year
field's gonna
too.
be easy. Obviously, I just also think that it was probably like a 30% chance that SLU were gonna win that series
That's
coming
true.
in.
That's true.
So
That's fair.
that's kind of my take on it. All that to say, still chances, still a lot of opportunities for upsets here in CLOL. We'll be tracking that throughout the end of the season, as well as the NACL, which kicks off in just over a week. Keep an eye out for changes to our schedule and our upload timing. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like. We'll talk about it and eventually. But you're going to see still 2 episodes a week, still our Patreon content, all here on the Salty Runback YouTube channel. Maybe even a little bit more sprinkled in there as we get towards the end of the season.
Yeah, it's going to be a really great season. This is we've now completed the most insane tournament that's ever happened in North America, and we're getting into another fucking insane tournament, which is the full like split double elim 32 team national championship, and we're gonna have a side of NACL the whole way. I say it that way because Grapes, I don't know if you agree. I think CLOL is the headlining event in North American developmental this year. I think this is going to be an absurd
We got to
CLOL
make it
season. Yeah, I agree. I think the CLOL season is going to be fucking nuts. NACL will be fun to watch too, especially once it gets more towards playoffs. A lot of stuff to talk about. Come talk about it with us in our Discord. As Grape said, make sure you subscribe to our Patreon at Salty Runback NA. Check us out everywhere else, as well as at Hawkcast and at Speedy Grapes. Grapes was tweeting like a demon all weekend while I was rolling dice and moving miniatures around on the table. Hopefully the shoe can be on the other foot sometime
We'll trade off
soon. Yeah. You've generally been better at Twitter than I have, though. I think it's fair to say. Regardless of all of that, hey, if you think that my Twitter's pretty good, take what I said with a grain of salt. Hope you all have a good one.